we don't understand why we're losing the battle. I hate to use the term battle, but, why we're losing, because we don't know what the good news is. We don't live the good news, and the world is not hearing or seeing good news. If we don't know what it is, how are they supposed to hear it?
Why the gospel doesn't sound like good news. Today on In the Shadow of the Cross. I am Loren Rosser, and I am here once again with my friends Jim Durkin.
Good morning.
And Michael Harden.
Hello.
So we were discussing the topic that we're going to have today, and I was immediately brought back to a time when my wife and I took a trip to San Antonio, Texas, and to the Riverwalk. And we were walking through the downtown area in a big crowd of people who were all touristing. And there was some people on the corner with a loudspeaker out there preaching the gospel, and I hold no judgment against them because I've done this too. But as they were preaching the gospel, it was interesting. We could hear in the crowd murmurings particularly amongst the younger people who were maybe like in their 20s. Overheard a couple people saying, "This is terrible. These people say that my friend who is gay is going to hell." And someone came over to hand this person a tract, and she immediately lashed out and said, "No, I don't want that. You say my friends are going to hell." And so we were talking about, well, what makes the gospel good news? If people are immediately perceiving something, it doesn't take a genius to figure out if something's good news or not. If I come home to my wife and I say, "Lily, I've got good news for you. The car engine blew up today, and we don't have a car right now." Isn't that great news? It's obvious. Everybody with one functioning brain cell listening to this would go, that is not good news at all. On the other hand, if I come home and I say, "Lily, guess what? I just got a massive raise and we're getting a new car." That's obviously good news. So for the gospel to be good news, it has to actually be good news. And to put it the way Darren Hufford said, that the message that has so often been carried in evangelical Christianity has basically gone like this. If you were to just summarize it into a small perspective, it was basically a man's in love with a woman. He goes up to the woman and says, "I really love you. Will you marry me?" And she's like, "Well, I find you very interesting. Let me think about it." He goes, "Well, I just want you to know, if you don't marry me, I'm going to pour gasoline on you and light you on fire." So that kind of summarizes the message that has been put out there as far as the gospel. We make the good news is the bad thing I was going to do to you, I'm not doing to you. That's kind of more of a threat to me than good news. So what do you guys think? What makes the gospel good news?
Jimbo?
You put a lot out there in just a few minutes there, Loren. I'm still hung up on the engine that blew up, and although it could be good news if the engine that blew up was in an old car and your raise was enough to get a brand new car, especially a hybrid.
Right. Exactly.
Go green, baby.
Yeah, go green. And then it's good news. But I agree with you. It's interesting how we take a message and spin it. We've come up with a theory or a woven message. When we were discussing this earlier, that has been added to over the centuries since Jesus walked the earth, and the additions have not helped us out. Let's put it that way. It's not got us closer to truly good news. We spoke in weeks past about Jesus the peacemaker. And it's interesting that even in that, I think I put something on Facebook about Jesus the peacemaker, and I don't know how many people immediately come back with, Jesus said, I did not come to bring peace, but to set at variance a man against his wife. And it's like,
I wish you guys could see the facial expressions both Jim and Michael are making right now.
is that really the Jesus you want? Is that the Jesus that you say that you're in love with, and his Father God? That, as Lauren says, either in that case, either marry my son or I'll destroy you. You know, either love me or I'll kill you. And is that the kind of love relationship we want to have? So I think this next hour is going to be a very interesting time as we begin to explore what true love is, what love is from the Father, what love is from Christ, and what love looks like from us as we reciprocate. So I'll kick it back to you, Michael.
Well, let's start exactly there, Jim. Let's start with the axiom, God is love, the biblical axiom from 1 John. And let's correlate that with the other axiom in 1 John, God is light. And in God there is no dark side at all. Now, this is very important. God is pure love and pure light. There's no dark side to God. There's no hate side to God. Okay? Now, what is the real problem of the modern Christian view of religion? Think about it for a second. If you wanted to have a religion, would you place at the center and heart of that thing the story of an innocent guy being condemned and tried, convicted, and killed and crucified? I mean, what religion? Really? You know, the execution story of Jesus. Well, the fact is, that execution story tells us more about everything than anything else can tell us about it. It is in its heart and soul, this story of Jesus, not simply an anthropology, a revelation of our scapegoating tendencies, but it's also pure revelation of the Father's heart. And the purity that comes through the cross is precisely tied to love, absolute love and light. There's revelation happening here. And that's that God does not have a dark side. Okay? That is the axiom upon which we can build our entire Christian theology. However, we early on, because of the influence of the Jerusalem church and the literature that comes out of it, like the Gospel of Matthew, the book of Revelation, and Jude, James, 1st and 2nd Peter, we have that tradition that is still, the gospel is being lived out within a Jewish Second Temple eschatological framework and mentality. And that has a rather wrathful God. Okay? There has never, ever been created by human beings a God that was nonviolent and pure love. We humans, all of our gods, are two-faced, yin and yang, God and Satan. And sadly, we could document through church history, the cross divided, we have put back together. And so our God, in the evangelical tradition, looks more like Satan than Jesus. There's a number of historical reasons that we think that. You know, we have very bad atonement theories, the penal substitutionary atonement theory being a particularly bad version of an alcoholic parent that's a divine child abuser, is really what it boils down to. And then we get all weepy, Jesus paid the price for my sins. Yeah, well, not in the way you think. And this has a lot more to do with just trying to feel better because you confessed your sin. You felt really bad before you did it. You knew you were going to do it. You felt good doing it, but now you regret it. Jesus, blood covers me. Language the New Testament never uses. I mean, come on, come on. We live in sin management then. That's not good news. There's
No.
nothing good news about that, man. Dang, I spent my whole life trying to be pure and holy and this is like, and then there's this other side of me that just comes in and I want to deny that reality. And instead of remembering the Apostle Paul had this same reality in Romans 7 and in Galatians. How did he break through it? Well, instead of exploring those important kind of questions, what Christianity's done is it's turned the Father of Jesus into just another God.
Wow, there is so much there. Just real quick, a quick side note, then I want to come back. It's funny when you're talking about sin management and, trying to be holy. I was in a conversation with somebody this week that was really interesting because he was talking about, he goes, God is causing me to become more holy because he's helping me to learn to listen to people and think less about myself. And I just sat back and went, I have never heard anyone describe holiness that way.
No, that's quite
I
beautiful.
was I was stunned. I thought that was some good revelation there. Anyway, so the whole thing with yeah, man, so much because you got penal substitutionary atonement. You've got God not having a dark side. And Michael, when you said that there has never been a God in any religion that doesn't have a dark side, that really struck me because you're right. And even in Christianity, and even discussing with people, unless people have really come to that revelation of that there is no darkness in Jesus, even Christianity has, like you said, that dual-faced God where there is this dark side. Don't make him mad, don't get him upset or he's going to come get you. And wow, I mean, it's no wonder it's interesting because when Jesus talked about that being persecuted, it's the thing I find fascinating is what he was being persecuted for was showing a God who has no dark side.
Yeah.
So that really gets under people's skin because, man, I mean, just recently in events in the news with the rise of violence and everything, and man, I just hear it all the time. The people just wanting that violent God to justify holding on to their violence. So we're looking at the message of, so what is the good news message? What was we mentioned that our gospel starts with. And like what religion does this, as you said, with an innocent man being killed. So let's start with this. You mentioned sin being forgiven, but not in the way that people think. Let's start right there, because that was a mess I had to try to untangle just this week in a social media discussion. How would you guys tackle that? Yeah, Jim.
Let me jump in on that for a second before Michael takes it down the road, kicks the ball way down the road. I was thinking about that. Within a relatively short period of time, a baby comes to understand that there are things that people over them, older siblings, mom, dad, aunts, uncles, whoever, says is wrong behavior. And because it's wrong behavior, it must be punished in some way. And, I maybe I shouldn't admit this, but when I was a young man and my oldest daughter was not more than 6 or 7 months old, and she had colic really, really bad, and so she cried a lot. And I remember going to my dad and asking him, like, how soon can you start disciplining your child for not obeying you? And not obeying me was about the issue of me telling her to stop crying, and she's 6 months old. And so we ingrain this into our children generation after generation after generation. Discipline always looks different, but the bottom line is really the same. You transgress some law that I established, and because you transgressed, you must be disciplined or punished or whatever. And so it goes without saying that we would transfer that same concept onto God, that there must be laws. We call them universal laws or whatever. And especially if we're in evangelical Christian circles, the Bible's full of them. I mean, it's packed with laws. And if you transgress, you deserve to be punished. And who's going to be the punisher? Well, the one who wrote the laws. And that's got going to be God. And there is an ultimate punishment. And so we write this script not based on anything that God himself said or Jesus said, not based on anything that the Holy Spirit desires to bring us into the truth, only based on our human proclivities and our personal bent on things. That authority establishes laws, and that same authority has a penal process by which they punish the transgressor of those laws. And again, we try and fit that into something we call the good news, that there's an escape clause, and we call that penal substitution or whatever. But when we look at Scripture, in light of the Holy Spirit illuminating that, we see that there's none of that in Scripture. It isn't, I sin, he forgives, I sin, he forgives, I sin, he forgives, and God help me that I get the forgiveness before I die, because if I didn't get the forgiveness, it's like slippery slope. Uh, you know, and it's like, I'm just going to throw it out there and then I'll let Michael pick it up. What if this God who so loved me, what if he actually removed the law altogether?
You set the stage very well for Michael.
Yeah. That was a slow ball coming at me. Here it comes. You're cracking that part up. Yeah, so fundamentally, this message of this crucified Christ is good news, because what it does is it redefines for us many things. So the first thing, Lauren, we've used the word sin. We need to define that. What do we mean by sin? Now,
Absolutely.
of course, since time immemorial, we've learned to distinguish between we have moral principles and values, and we've learned through philosophy what's the good, the beautiful, the true, the just, the right, and we've created all sorts of things called natural law, and what we think is natural law, and on and on and on and on and on. Okay. Now, humans society that is sacrificial in nature expresses its sin socially. It is the way we treat one another. It is our interactions, our engagements with one another that can or cannot be sinful. This has nothing to do with so-called personal or private sin. That's absurd. Everybody has their challenges. Sin manifests socially in relationships. That's where sin is. Sin only exists in relationships, and it only exists as that which fractures and destroys. So, what am I forgiven? when I come to the cross, I'm forgiven the way I treat people. I'm forgiven the way I treated Jesus. Um, and being forgiven, I also now have the anthropological awareness that in relation to others, I will forgive them. Now we actually have a theological concept, the cross, becoming a transformative relational reality. You see that? You can go from so-called good atonement theory straight on into not ethics, what's better than ethics. It's the actual work of the Spirit transforming human relationships.
This is powerful, because the first thing that jumped out at me is what you're describing, and Jim, what you led into, is that this gospel then is not about, like you said, some personal piety, some personal individual me and Jesus thing, or some mystical or afterlife experience assurance. Even though we're going to get to the resurrection in a little bit, that's there. I'm not ripping that out, but what I am saying though is that the gospel then actually has a visual appearance in this world. In other words, if the gospel is in my life, it's going to affect my interactions with people. So the gospel actually is something that's visible. It's not something that's just, I asked Jesus into my heart, he's in my heart now I'm going to heaven. It's something that the actual gospel means it impacts my relationships with other human beings. But okay, now people who would say it's about going to heaven, they would say, well, yeah. But what I've noticed is they make that secondary. The primary thing is me getting my insurance, and then because I'm following the laws, the rules, I'm supposed to be nice to people. So it's more of a rule kind of thing. But what you're talking about, Michael, is that the gospel is God forgiving me for my hostility towards my neighbor and towards him. So it's totally on a relational basis, which means that if, he'll forgive me all the time. I'm not saying this instant transformation where suddenly I'm like, I'm wonderful to everybody now. But as he's working in my life, that means I'm receiving that forgiveness. I do it one day, I treat Jim bad. One day I treat Jim bad. The next day I treat Jim bad. The next day, God forgives me, God forgives. But eventually, that transformation is going to work in my heart, where now I'm going to stop treating Jim badly. So it's like there would be a physical...
I'd like to know when that's going to begin, Lauren.
Oh, he always wants to talk eschatology.
So, 70 times 7, brother.
Okay. I got it.
But no, so it's like, I guess the thing that irks me in the evangelical gospel that I grew up with is it doesn't have a here and now reality to it. There's like it's just all about, it's basically Gnostic, because it's all about what happens after. It's all about getting my assurance, but I hate that the gospel is so missing the element of it should be, it's impacting our world now. It's impacting the people around me now. And Michael, what you were saying is that the gospel is directly impacting our relationships with one another by forgiving us for the way we treated one another. And so it's something that if somebody says they're living the gospel, we should actually see something in this world here and now, not some sweet by and by experience. So what are your thoughts?
Well, why do you think Christians of all types, especially in the last 50 years, have slipped the moors and gone into charismania? They want experience of the divine. That's what they want. They want to feel it. They want to touch it. They need to know it's real, because the world feels unreal to them. Life feels unreal, but God feels real. They're looking for that feeling, okay? That's as false as escaping into intellectualism. Well, I'm going to prove that God exists. And here's all my rational arguments and everything else. And because I can prove it, I'll believe it.
Oh,
You know,
wow. Yeah.
both those aren't near as absurd as the escape into holiness cults, where rigid requirements can be life or death matters. Salvation matters, big salvation, like the Amish, you know. But I mean, it's astonishing. So these are all false starts. These are all Christianity. That's religion. That's religion. The gospel that the Spirit empowers is always going to manifest as love and light. What does light do? It reveals,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Right.
It reveals. Now, when we are engaged as these light lovers, I like that, light lovers. Here we are. We're engaging others this way. We need to know two things. One, the world isn't going to understand us. And two, they won't be able to overcome us with their hate. And that's just simply John 1:5 with with the play on words there. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness shall not overcome it, either intellectually or militarily.
I think also what we're talking about there is to become people who are transformed by love. And it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. But as we're being transformed by love, there's a couple of things that one, the Lord says that this is how the whole world's going to know that you're my disciples, not by charismania. I make no apologies for it. I'm a charismatic. I love big conferences. I love worship services. But if we don't take it out of the building, I mean, I was just at a gathering of young Jesus people last weekend, and I had a great time. I mean, it was wonderful.
I'd love to do
But
something like that someday.
but
That'd be
my
awesome.
address to them had to do with the 50-year long relationships that I have with hundreds of people around the country. And we have grown in not only in our relationship, which began in the Jesus People movement, but it's grown over the years until we are a family. And my challenge to these young people is don't just go from this mountaintop experience to a mountaintop experience, and then you go to the hellhole called life in between, looking for the next big charismatic happening. But instead, build relationships that are based on God's interpretation of love, not humanism. I mean, we can do all this, social justice, humanistic love stuff, and that doesn't prove anything. It only proves that we're human, or whatever. It doesn't prove that we're God's disciples. So it has to be love God's way, and that's sometimes that's sacrificial. To love a person, to forgive, 70 times 7, to constantly keep coming back and to manifest love when they're spitting in your face, and so I think we can have both. I think we can be the student who digs into the nuances of the original languages and the writings of the early church fathers. We can be a charismatic, but again, and I appreciate what you're saying, Michael, neither of those are true and undefiled religion. The final thing that I wanted to say on that note is I love what I believe it's First John says, and I seldom have ever heard a message preached on this. If you say, I love God, but do not love your brother, you're a liar.
Yeah.
And so much of Christian circles, the whole thing is get your love of God down. Just get your love of God down. And you're sitting in a building with 20, 50, 100, 3,000 other people, and you don't even know any of them, you know? And you're not sure. As a matter of fact, you've got everybody in that room pegged. Oh, that's Mrs. So-and-so. She's this. Oh, that's so-and-so. His kids are a wreck. Oh, that's so. And you've got all these people judged, and your excuses as to why you wouldn't possibly like them or hang out with them, but you, quote, do church with them, and you call them your brother or sister. As a matter of fact, you don't know their name, so you just call them brother.
That's too real.
And this is somehow manifesting to the world because they see you with your big Bible under your arm as you walk into this building called church. And it's like somehow this whole thing is really upside down and squirrely if you looked at it on the surface of things. And we don't understand why we're losing the battle. I hate to use the term battle, but, why we're losing, Yeah. Because we don't know what the good news is. We don't live the good news. And the world is not hearing or seeing good news. If we don't know what it is, how are they supposed to hear it?
Yeah, man, that is really good, Jim. So it's interesting because I like how you said that we're taught all the time, get the love of God down. Make sure you love the Lord your God first, all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and then love your neighbor as yourself. So it's like, I got to get this love of God thing down. But I like how you talked about, but I don't even know my neighbor next to me. Every day we have the opportunity to, quote, get our love of God down just by in how I treat the people around me and how I put them first, or, love my neighbor as I love myself. Just in line with what you said, Jim, on First John, that's getting the love of God down, is loving my neighbor. But in light of that, lest it turn into some kind of another, we're putting another law on people, that can only be done when I know I'm forgiven. When I know I'm forgiven from the way that I treat people, that I'm able to receive the love of God to love another. And that's where it's seen. It's seen. It's the fruit that I have been forgiven. And so now I am growing in the place where I can enter relationships with no illusions that you're going to hurt me. Probably not on purpose, but it's kind of like the thing we talked about with peace, knowing that when you choose the path of peace, have no illusions, you're going to get hurt. And it's the same thing with love. It's like, when you know you choose love, have no illusions, love hurts. And that's why I don't want to love people, is because I don't want to get hurt. And not even just because they're going to be mean to me. Sometimes that's part of it, but it also hurts because I start caring about people. And what if that person dies? What if something bad happens? And that hurts. So it's easier to just build my little castle where I don't have to worry about getting hurt, because I won't have to experience loss, disappointment, heartache. I won't have to suffer with anybody, anything like that. So yeah, it's the gospel very much is very real world. Yeah, I like how you guys are bringing this home on it actually impacting the people around us.
The problem with Gnostic Christianity, which is what Christianity is, and always has been, except for perhaps a few segments here and there, but it's primarily Gnostic, is we have so separated heaven from earth, and we have become so focused on seeking heaven, seeking the other side, and wanting better things. Whatever's on the other side is going to be better. It's always better on the other side, right? So we're stuck in the grip of this kind of dualism, right? And with no idea that one single verse, 4 words in Scripture, the Word became flesh. That's all bridged. There's not even two separate now. Everything's in right relationship. Jesus puts everything in right relationship as he comes into our existence. So that's why Gnostic Christianity never made any sense. Only incarnational Christianity, and that's where the Spirit, sent by the Father through the Son, bears the character of the Son right into us. And we then manifest that Spirit by learning to talk together, to help each other, to nurture each other, to encourage each other in our faith, with not a single law. The only law, as Paul says, is the law of love. And love brings freedom, gives complete freedom to the other, it's wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking too how we're talking about how Gnosticism has so invaded Christianity and polluted this. Just this week, I was in a discussion with somebody how they were talking about Jesus dying on the cross, and we were going about that quote. As Michael, as you pointed out, in the Jesus-driven life, how when Jesus was on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? And he was quoting the Psalm, and this person was debating with me, saying that, oh no, that is when God turned his face away. Or no, excuse me, they didn't say God turned his face away. They said that is when Jesus was so consumed with our sin that the man part of him couldn't see God anymore. But basically, like, the God part of him was still intact. And I was like, okay, you do realize that's completely Gnostic because you just said it wasn't all of him suffering. It was the man part, but the God part of him's out there being just fine. And the reason I bring that up is we're talking about this gospel message. A huge part of the gospel is knowing that I have a God who stands in solidarity with me in my suffering. If God escapes through his little God part of him steps out of the picture when the man part of him is suffering, how is he with me in my suffering? Because I can't do that. I can't let part of me step out of the suffering. So anyway, I thought it just shows how Gnosticism is so infused in modern Christianity that we don't even realize how much of the things that we do and say and believe are just loaded with Gnosticism, of this whole view of escapism, God not really being human with us in our sufferings. And so it's like, how can we then be the gospel? Because if we don't even have a God who's fully incarnate with us, then how can we be fully incarnate with our neighbors?
Bada bing.
Well, I think it comes down to, we want to understand everything. And when we begin to approach God, when we begin to approach the gospel, really, when we begin to approach love, there is little, if any, understanding at all. It's almost, and I know I'm taking it out of context, but I'm going to do it anyhow. As high as the heavens are above the earth, so are my ways above yours. And what we're talking about here, that just transcends human understanding. That's not the way we operate. And to tell me that God operates on a level of love that doesn't even make sense to us in the beginning, and you have to begin to, all right, I don't understand it, but I'm still going to embrace that message, and I'm going to seek to walk in it. I'm going to seek, and it's as we begin to embrace the non-sacrificial aspects of love, as we make ourselves vulnerable, like you said, Lauren, to be hurt, and yet to continue to love anyhow. we begin to gain understanding. Oh, I see how that works. Okay. And we kind of take the next step. But if we're not willing to step out, on the water, so to speak, it's like step out when you don't understand, when it doesn't make sense to you why you would do this. Why would you? I'm going to use a really terrible analogy, but why would you put the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit back together as one? Why not keep them separate? The three persons of the Godhead. They're all persons, and somehow, oh yes, in the Spirit, somehow they're one, but they're really three distinct persons, and we've got to keep them separate. And it's like, why? Why is that so necessary among the vast majority of Christianity to keep them separate? Why do we have a fully God, fully man Jesus who is somehow separate? Well, he did this as God, but he did this as man. It's like for instance, understanding of John 17. It takes faith to understand that when Jesus says, I and the Father are one, he means that. When he says, I want you to be one with us, he means one. Not somehow, metaphysically, or, somehow in this, spiritual sense, but I and the Father will come into you and make our abode in you. And so we're not mustering up the ability to love because God and Jesus way up in heaven, wherever heaven is, the third heaven or the seventh heaven or
Imagine there's no heaven.
but God and Jesus and Spirit living in me is loving through me. And that, I don't understand that. But I somehow have to accept it, and in accepting it, I begin to walk in it, and in walking in it, I begin to understand it, but the understanding goes way past my brain. It's like, I don't know all that, how it works, but I know that it does work that way. It's like, I don't start out by understanding it. I start out by accepting it.
Well, that's precisely the way of the Christian faith tradition. It's the Latin phrase, fides quaerens intellectum. Faith seeks understanding. It has its own internal logic and rationality, but faith seeks to understand that in which it is trusted, and which is very different than understanding seeking faith, which is how religion works. If it makes sense to me, I believe it, we're all good to go.
Yeah.
And the thing is, the gospel turns our thinking upside down. The gospel turns our thinking inside out. The gospel, in a sense, mocks our intellectualism. It mocks our wokeness. It mocks our sophistication. The gospel, rightly understood, is the biggest threat to Christianity there is, because when the gospel is revealed for what it is, which is what the work of the Spirit does, and thankfully it happens all over the world all the time. I mean, people are more and more and more. I'm seeing more and more books that are dealing with the question of the so-called violent God of the Jewish Scriptures. How do we handle the relationship? And we're seeing more and more of that work being done out there, and all that means is more and more people are now getting set up to, when this good news really hits them, do you really know that in the depth of your despair, you are blessed?
Yeah.
Because whatever you thought a God was isn't. And this is what a God experience feels like. This is why you have to go through this. People don't understand. It's in their greatest despair. It's in their worst, horrid moment of life where the crushing weight of reality has been thrust onto one's shoulders, and it's in that moment when nothing works, nothing you believe works, there's no hope, it's empty, it's empty. And it's at that moment that the Father says, excellent, we got all the crap out. Now let me tell you something. Take the load off, Annie. Put it right here. Come sit next to me. We're going to start from the beginning. That's why we must, in our life at some point, have a dark night of the soul. And it is an event. I tell you right now, and you guys are shaking your heads because you've been through it, you have to have it. And Christians that have not been through that dark night of the soul and did not get embittered and then just disappear off the scene, that open their hearts to the Father at that point are the ones that are going to be the future mentors, leaders, pastors, and teachers because they've been through it. Now, this upcoming apocalyptic next decade, in that sense, is going to produce a most good harvest for the decades after.
Now, so you're not saying, and I know you're not saying that the Lord himself manufactures that dark night of the soul so that he can teach you something, which gets spoken from a lot of pulpits across the country.
No, God does not create suffering.
Exactly. But
love doesn't inflict suffering.
But what I do hear you say is that he is in that suffering with us.
He's in that suffering with us, and it's at the point. It's at the very point. God, we all been there. It's like almost suicidal. It's at that very point where there's emptiness, there's nothingness. That if we just at that point we've just uttered our last prayer, Father, I can't. I don't. God, dear God, help me. Whenever we say, bang, that's the point that revelation can occur and work can begin deep in the soul and healing and moving forward.
I was pastoring in New York and doing a considerable amount of traveling, doing conferences and whatever, speaking in churches and things like that. And through a series of events, many of them I brought on myself through whatever, my humanity, let's put it that way. I had a complete emotional and mental breakdown. And one day, just for case in point, one day I went out to a ball field and I sat on home plate, and it was early in the morning, and the next thing I know, the sun was setting. And I don't remember ever a thought going through my mind. I don't remember why I was there. It's just, I guess I should go home now. And that went on for about 3 years. And I was invited to a men's retreat that previously I had actually led them or spoke at them or whatever. And I was like, I do not want to go. I can't face those men. It's like, look at me. And the brothers prevailed on me. No, Jim, you need to come. You need to come. And so I went, and for the life of me, I do not know why, but for some reason, I was sitting on the front row. And we were singing an old song, I love you, Lord, I lift my voice to worship you and rejoice.
Yeah.
And I heard in the core of my being, I heard the Lord ask me, like Peter on the seashore, do you love me? Yes, Lord, I love you. Do you love me? Yes, Lord, I love you. Do you love me? Yes, Lord. Not 3 times. And no response back. Just probably 20 or 30 times. And finally, I'm on the ground. I'm on my knees. I'm sobbing. I do love you, Lord. I do love you, Lord. And finally I heard this: I love you too, son. And it was over. It was in that moment of revelation that the Lord loved me in what you're saying, my darkest hour. That it was the love that brought the healing. And
Yeah.
I share that just to, punctuate what you're saying, Michael, that did God bring that about? No, absolutely not. But God was there with me. He was on that baseball diamond with me. He
Yeah.
was on the days that I couldn't get out of bed with me.
Yeah.
And he was on the day that he asked me, do you love me?
Yeah.
And he was
Yeah.
there just to simply say, I love you too. And then he identified it, son. I love
Yes.
you, son. You know.
Yeah.
And that was all I needed. That was it.
Yeah, I have a similar story in that, and for me, it's how God meets us in suffering. And this was a foundation point in my life that completely altered everything, became really kind of the bedrock of my relationship with Christ. Lily and I were in our early 20s. She was pregnant. She was pregnant with twins. And we, to that point, I didn't even know this. I thought deep within me that because I'm a good Christian, I follow Jesus, I do what I'm supposed to do, I try to love my neighbor, I'm a good person. I'm following Jesus. I got Jesus in my heart. I would never say this out loud, but I thought that meant bad things don't happen to me. And as ridiculous as it sounds, see, that's what I'm saying. I would have never verbalized that. But we have these things in our heart that get manifest in these moments. And in that moment, we were both in our mid-20s. And so Lily goes into premature labor. She's only about, I think it was about 3 or 4 months, about 3 months before the twins were due. And she goes, her water breaks. And so we rush to the hospital. Long story short, I had a son and a daughter. My son, they couldn't keep him in the womb. He was coming. So he was born, and they took him, and they said his lungs aren't developed yet. He's, way too young. So they're working on him, trying to save his life. And I'm standing there next to him. Lily's in the hospital room, and I'm just watching. And the nurse just sees me like devastated, watching my son die right in front of me. And my the nurse finally just stops the doctor and says, "Let him see his son," and hands me my son. And literally, all I could say that could come out of me was, "Go be with Jesus. Go be with Jesus." And he literally died in my arms. So I give him back to. Well, I think I took him down for Lily to say goodbye, and then I gave him back to the nurse, and I'm about to have a full-down breakdown, and I'm looking for a place to cry, and I'm in this hospital, and I'm looking for an empty room. I'm just going down the hallway looking for an empty room because I'm gonna lose it. I walk right in front of the elevator. The door opens, and a good friend of mine, Bill Sofer, who's a big teddy bear of a man, big construction worker, think of Dan Connor on Roseanne, loves Jesus with all his heart, just does work in Mexico now, steps out of the elevator right in front of me at that exact moment. And I just grabbed him and just sobbed, and in that moment, what I saw, by the way, the other child was able to stay in her. That's my daughter, Michaela. She was born premature. But here's the thing, is that no Superman Jesus showed up for me. No Superman God came in. I thought that's what's supposed to happen. I thought, I'm a Christian. The miracle's supposed to come. What did come in the midst of my suffering was Jesus, through Bill, stepped out right in front of me and took me in his arms and held me and let me cry like I never cried before. Mm-hmm. And see, to me, that's the message that preaches at the gates of Auschwitz, is that Jesus is there in our suffering. We're not left abandoned by him, just like his Father never left him on the cross. He never leaves us in our suffering. He's right there with us. I don't, and this is one of those things, again, Jim, when you talk about understanding, this is one of those things I don't understand. My son died. They were saying all these terrible things that could be wrong with my daughter. They're saying, they were able to keep her in the womb one more week, but she still came, like, she was 1 pound 7 ounces when she was born. And they were telling me all the things that are going to be wrong with her. And it was weird. Oh, by the way, when she was still in Lily's womb, Lily has this dream where an angel comes to her and says, I was sent to watch over the child. And then Michaela is born, and the doctor's saying all these things that could be wrong with her. And it was weird. It was like going in right in one ear and out the other. And you've all met her. Have you seen anything wrong with her other than, that she's my kid? No, just kidding.
She's like incredible, right? Very beautiful, very, very wonderful, sarcastic sense of humor.
Exactly.
Yeah. Ever since I first met her when she was just a baby, just a beautiful young lady. Yeah.
And so it's one of those things where it's like, on one hand, we didn't get the miracle, and on the other, we did. And you talk about it. I like how I've always liked it. Brendan Manning wrote a book called Ruthless Trust. I just love the title. And so it's one of those things where it's like, on one hand, we didn't get the miracle, and on the other, we did. And you talk about it. I like how I've always liked it. Brendan Manning wrote a book called Ruthless Trust. I just love the title because the title Ruthless Trust, it had a picture on the cover of a tree, like an oak tree on the edge of a cliff being bombarded by wind. And I feel like that's because going through, we were trying to wrestle with all that it was for years. The wrestling, it wasn't like, okay, now I just have this new theology. I mean, years of wrestling of why, why God, why did we lose our son? Why, and
what kind of a God are you anyway?
Exactly. And what's so strange is the message we're sharing now. People who haven't suffered hate it, or people who want the charismatic high life of the health and wealth gospel and stuff. But if you've suffered, what we're sharing is actually encouraging, because it was when I was sitting in a church pew, it was a few years after all this, that a man came in and he was sharing, and he was talking about the life of Joseph. And he was talking about how Joseph had his dark night of the soul, going into the well and being sold into slavery. And he goes, this is the pattern. This is the way God works in our lives. Not pattern, that's the wrong term, but he's there in our suffering, and that he will work through our suffering. And hearing that, because I'd never been told about suffering. I'd never been taught that suffering is something that God uses to transform us and conform us into his image. Jesus learned obedience through the things that he suffered. And here's the thing too. There's a mystery in suffering, because I didn't, when I was going through that and other things that I've gone through, we've been through bankruptcy, we've been through foreclosure, we've been through all kinds of wonderful things. And when you go through those things, as you guys know all too well, there's a lot of screaming that goes on. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of frustration. There's a lot of stuff that doesn't look what we think is Christian at all, wonderful at all. And you just go through hell on earth, and it seems like nothing's happening in you. It seems like nothing is growing, nothing is happening, nothing's there. The weird thing is you come out of that. And I found something interesting when I would talk to people. I would be talking to somebody, and I don't say this to pump me up. I just say this as a reality of what suffering does. People would be clinging to what I say. And I would step back and go, that's weird. Because something happens in suffering that brings kind of if lack of a better word, a power into your life. an authority, if you will, that's not there before when you haven't really suffered. In other words, when you haven't been to the gates of hell and back, and you haven't walked aside your fellow brothers and sisters in humanity and suffered like they have, there's just not much there. And that's why the health and wealth gospel, it falls on deaf ears. It's, we want that, but it's not reality. What brings authority, and I'm not even talking about, I would be talking about suffering. I'm just saying I'd be sharing something that God's doing in my life or something. But there was an authority there that wasn't there before. And that's where I look at the life of Joseph, where if you notice, it was his dark night of the soul that prepared him to be, now his was a literal authority, but I'm talking where when you see in Jesus, there was an authority when he spoke, because he learned his father's ways through the things he suffered.
Yes.
Lauren, can I adjust something just a little bit? You said the wealth and and prosperity and all that, the God is good all the time, which I believe he is good all the time, but what people say, that kind of stuff. That message is great for building mega churches and raking in millions and millions of dollars into the coffers. The message that those people who have found God in the middle of their suffering, their message may not build churches. As a matter of fact, it won't. But I can guarantee one-on-one, it will build lives. Because it's with the comfort that we've been comforted that we comfort one another. And so as we go about loving others as Christ has loved us, how has he loved us? In our suffering, in our pain. And as we go about loving others that way, we go about it not to build a megachurch, we go about it to build an individual's life. We find the broken, we find the wounded, we find the hurting, and we go and we put our arm around them and say, let me walk here with you. You mentioned Brennan Manning, and I love his story about when he had fallen off the wagon and he was in New Orleans, in the gutter, puking his guts out, and his buddy came and just sat with him. Didn't come to preach, didn't come to tell him, Brennan, you know better, just came to sit with him. And I think that's a part of our gospel, is that we sit with the broken.
Yeah.
And like your buddy, who God just told him, go down to the hospital, be there, open the door right now, not audibly, but I mean, it was there, just to be there with you. And I think that's, I'm looking up at the clock and I'm saying, oh, our time's run out again. It's time, Lauren, for you to sign off.
All right, so we'll do.
But I think we ought to pick this right back up, and
exactly.
I think we got another mile or two to go with this one.
Well, everybody, that is all the time we have, but we're having such a good discussion. We're going to continue this one next week. So thanks for joining us, everybody. And Jim, where can people get a hold of your book?
Amazon.com.
All righty. And Michael, where can people find your materials?
Amazon.com under Cures for Insomnia.
Cures for Insomnia. Okay. I'll keep that in mind. No. All right, everybody. Well, thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you all next week.